Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Regional Admission Counselors of California Virtual College Fair. This session, college admissions, how the pandemic made the process pivot. Lots of P's there. Got a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your cameras and microphones are off, so the panelists can't see or hear you. This is just one of many different sessions happening, including the 6x6 college fairs on the way starting next hour. Be sure to sign up for more if you haven't done so already at the same place you signed up for this. And this presentation is being recorded and it'll be available within about a week at strivescan.com/RACC, R-A-C-C. All right, I've gotten the housekeeping stuff out of the way, so I'll step out of the way and turn it over now to our presenters.
Well, fabulous. And thank you again, as Russ said, for giving up your afternoon to share some time with us. Speaking of share, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. James, Camille, can you guys see that okay?
All good.
Perfect. And as Russ noted, we're all members of a group called Regional Admission Counselors of California. He did note the title and he said a lot of P's. And I always said, we're going to be on the screen till there's a vaccine. Soon we'll be done with the Zoom. But we're going to talk about the pandemic and college admissions today. Let everybody introduce themselves. We'll begin with Camille.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Camille Kreitz, and I'm with Syracuse University. I am based in the Los Angeles area.
Hello, everybody. My name is James Gilby. I'm with the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. I am regionally based in Fullerton, Orange County.
And Gary B. with the University of New Mexico. And one of the things I want you guys to note is that we're all admission counselors. And I always say two stresses when people are looking to get admitted to college. Will I get admitted and how do I pay for it? And we're going to talk about the admissions process more than the paying part today. Start by connecting with admission counselors. You can go to our website, regionaladmissions.com. There's over 120 different colleges that have professionals. Camille, James, Gary B. We're admission counselors that live and take care of California students. So our job, as you heard, Camille's in Los Angeles, James is in Orange County. I'm in Central California, Ventura. So we're here to work with you. James will be doing a presentation next session about the University of Illinois. Camille's got a 7 o'clock presentation today. So, and I'm also at 7 o'clock, different group, but certainly connect with those and those. So, but let's start talking about the pandemic, the changes and what happened. And we're going to talk about the changes. Last March, the world changed. And college admissions certainly did have a lot of modifications. We'll talk about what happened last March, this fall and spring about coursework and grading. I'm going to cover a little bit about the ACT and the SAT and some new vocabulary, some words you've heard, but maybe they're misnomers, not. And we'll talk about activities. What did students do before and during the pandemic? What are colleges looking at? And we'll discuss demonstrated interest. Am I able to visit campuses I wasn't able to visit? I have to make decisions. We'll cover these areas and more in about the next 30 minutes. Certainly, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A and we'll save at least 10 minutes at the end to cover that. But we'll begin with Camille covering a little bit about coursework, and James will chime in on that as well. So Camille?
Okay, thank you, Gary. So when we're looking at applications, especially when we're doing a holistic reading, which means we're really looking in depth at your application, we're looking at the curriculum that you've chosen, meaning, the types of classes, are you taking those more advanced classes? Are you taking a full credit load as far as academic classes go? And then we're looking at the school that the student attends. When your counselor sends in their counselor letter to us that we attach to your application, they also send a profile in. And most of us are familiar with the school profiles of those schools we work with. But what the counselor's letter does is it really gives us some details like how many APs are you allowed to take? When are you allowed to start taking them? Do you even offer AP classes? Maybe you only offer honors classes. So we're looking at your particular what your particular school offers when we're looking at your curriculum. We're not expecting you to take classes that aren't offered at your high school. Class rigor, again, whether it's honors, AB, IB, AP classes. So depending on, what exactly you're taking, and then where you fall with your peers. Now, a lot of schools do not rank anymore, but based on all of the applications that we get from a particular high school, we can kind of see where you fall within the students, at least that are applying to our schools. And then of course, we look at your course load. So what has changed during COVID, at least for the private school sector, and James will talk about public schools a little bit more, is that we're looking at all of this information even more in depth. Partially because so many schools went test optional or test free, partially because we know that the spring semester 2020 was such a weird semester that it's really going to be hard for us to even look at that and figure out where that fits into your curriculum. So we have to look at everything else much, much closer. So we're actually starting to, score, for example, your curricular rigor. Instead of having those test scores, we're looking more at the curriculum and more at how much you've challenged yourself academically. So I'll let James talk a little bit about how the public school side of things and maybe what changed with them as far as coursework goes.
So yeah, Camille really hit a lot of those points, and there's a lot of similarities. I think with University of Illinois, we really do look at very similar to what you'd find at the UCs, probably with most of the Cal States as well. The curriculum for those students, I think from last year, so a lot of you guys are juniors, so we're looking at that second semester sophomore year into your first semester junior year. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit mind-boggling for us to kind of look at what you did, especially if you had pass or fail. So we're going to really look at really the whole part, every part of your curriculum. We call it almost like a resume from your freshman year all the way into your junior year. We do have students self-report their grades, and a lot of schools are doing that. And then whatever you're doing, your senior is in progress. So really the curriculum and rigor is going to matter in what you kind of did, because we were test optional. We're going to continue to be test optional, just like the UCs. So really the course load and what students have chosen to take, depending on the major that they took. Or they applied for, or the college which they applied to. So some of the more competitive academic colleges, we want a course load that's going to be strong, especially when it comes to math and science. Let's say with engineering, with let's say the business, we still would like to see those students taking strong math as well. With class rigor, it's going to show us really what have you done, and kind of what Camille talked about. If your school doesn't offer that many APs or high rigor or honors, whatever, we're not going to hurt a student, or it doesn't have an IB program. So, we are a somewhat rural area, and parts of California are very rural as well. So really depending on what the school has offered, we're not going to hurt a student that had no opportunity to take APs or honors or whatever you could take. But we want students to work as hard as they could on the major or the academic college that they may be applying to. With high numbers that you would find at the UCs, and what I've read about their new class isn't much different than what we were looking for because of being test optional. And some majors that you would find, UC Irvine, biology was one of the hardest majors to get into, very similar to what we would have with computer science. So not every major is going to be super competitive, but there's going to be certain majors that are going to be very competitive. That rigor is going to matter, I think, for the future with curriculum as well, when these schools are going to be test optional, because that's really the biggest change, I think, with coursework from my point of view, and what has changed within before the pandemic and now.
One of the questions we get asked all the time, I get curriculum's important, but how are grades going to be evaluated based on that curriculum? So Camille, James, talk about grades in that light, curriculum.
Yeah, great, Gary. So we recalculate our GPAs from weighted to unweighted. So it's on a 4.0 scale. And we're only looking at the A to G courses, what you'd have, very similar A to G courses that you'd have for the UCs. We have certain departments have higher language requirements, but it's very similar. So students want to recalculate a 4.6 GPA, and then it turns out to be like a 3.89. It just doesn't sometimes calculate what a student might think that they're having. Hey, look, I love ceramics. It was my favorite class through high school, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be counted in our unweighted GPA. So those are pretty important when you are looking at, what you're doing. Some schools obviously will have a higher weighted GPA with APs, IBs, and so forth. But when it gets recalculated, it definitely looks different. Trends is a good thing with grades. We're looking for students to really improve from freshman year all the way into their junior and into their senior year. Rigor does matter, I think, when it comes into when you're going into your junior and senior year. Classes, it's surprising that we prefer calculus and stats and business, where a lot of times students would think it would be stats. Those type of things, I think it's good to ask an admissions counselor what classes that you might be taking for your senior year. Trends matter because really when a student's doing very well at their, through their junior and senior year, they're going to continue that. If there's any up and down, and I know the pandemic, this is something that changed with trends. If there's something that happened, please tell us. And, Camille gives a great informational thing about essays later about what you should be saying and not saying with the COVID-19 pandemic, but trends do matter. And if something happened, please tell us. And we already kind of talked about the pass-fail letter grades. We're not going to hurt a high school that had those last spring, right? I get the pandemic times, but now because the pandemic has moved on, students gotten used to the hybrid or Zoom, kind of how Zoom is working with classrooms. To have a pass fail right now, you need a very good explanation for it. And then continuing right now with fall in 2001 grades, we haven't seen any changes within the state of Illinois. I would assume it's pretty similar to what you'd find probably in the Western states as well. So there's not a big thing, but like I said, trends matter. And then I'll pass it off to Camille.
Okay, thanks, James. So, I agree with pretty much everything that James said as far as private schools go as well. It's really important to ask your admissions reps how they do look at grades. We do the same thing as Illinois. We recalculate grades on a 4.0 scale and just your A to G grades. We're just looking at your academics. And that just sort of evens the numbers. And then we look more in depth as we talked about before. I think what's going to change this year, though, is that your final GPA may be lower than it would have if spring 2020 had been a normal year. And I think that's going to be the same for a lot of students. A lot of students, they did have a dip in their spring semester grades, and that's where trends come in. So usually we're looking for upward trends. We know that spring 2020 semester, there might be a blip in your transcript. What we really want to see is that after that dip from spring 2020, we want to see fall 2020 and spring 2021, we want to see an upward trend again. So, we're going to give everybody sort of the benefit of the doubt with those spring 2020 grades, but it does mean that you might have a little bit lower GPA, but everybody will be in that same situation. So that's probably the biggest change as far as GPAs and grade trends. And then those spring 2020. It's just really, really important that you pick yourself up and that you get yourself moving again and make sure that you're trending upwards again. If there's another dip in your transcript, again, that's something that we want to know about. But that spring 2020, we just realized that that's the way it is. So don't panic if you did have a bad spring 2020. Just make sure you've picked yourself up and you're moving forward with your GPA and your test scores, or just your trends, your grade trends, your transcript.
Great information. Take as much rigor as you possibly can and get as many good grades as you, A's and B's, students. That's what we're looking for. If you get an occasional C, it's not the end of the world, especially spring 2020. We knew the transition happened, and a pass is good, fail not so much. Let's go on and talk a little bit about essays. Camille?
Okay, so we mentioned talking about letting us know what happened if you have, for example, a dip in your transcript. So there is an extra information portion, at least on the Common App, and you can use that to talk about some sort of an anomaly in your transcript. It doesn't have to be about COVID because there's a whole nother COVID essay for that. But anything that happened irregular, that looks irregular on your transcript, something, you know, that isn't necessarily explainable anywhere else in the application, you can use that extra information portion for that. It could be, for example, that you had a learning difference and that you didn't find out about until, say, sophomore year. And as soon as you found out about that, your grades started improving. Because you got help and you got accommodations and that sort of thing. So anything like that, you know, maybe you got at the end of freshman year, you got a concussion and, you know, you didn't do so well your second semester freshman year. That's where you can let us know about these things. We all get that life happens. And so it's important for us to understand where those anomalies, what caused those anomalies on your transcript or anything else in your application. The personal essay obviously is the biggest part of the Common application. You know, the UCs have their different essays, but the Common application has the personal essay. That essay should be about you. The point is that we are trying to get to know you a little bit better. And especially this year where there's going to be a lot less personal contact. I mean, hopefully with you juniors, we'll be able to get to meet you in person. But there's a lot more virtual contact. And so we haven't been able to get to know students as much as we would possibly in the past. So that personal essay really helps us get to know you a little bit better. So you want to make that about yourself. You know, make it a story. It can be, you know, you choose one of the prompts, but try and really help us get to know you a little bit better. And then save the COVID-19 essay for something that happened during COVID, something that affected your life. Now, the COVID-19 essay is not required, nor is the extra information portion. You don't feel like you have to fill in the blanks if you leave those essays empty. But if COVID-19 hit you in a way, maybe it was harder for you to study at home because you had so many, you know, your brothers and sisters were at home or your parents were at home. And maybe you typically study in the public library because you don't have internet at home. And then the public libraries were closed. You know, let us know what happened during COVID. Maybe, you know, there was some sort of a tragedy in the family. Maybe a parent lost a job. So those are the things that you need to be letting us know in the COVID-19 essay to help us understand how it affected you and how it might have affected your grades. But don't feel like you absolutely have to write something, just like the extra information portion. And then finally, for interviews, a lot of us do encourage students to interview. This is something that you want to ask every college. Do you interview? Is it required? And when do you interview? Different colleges interview at different times. Some won't interview until they've accepted you or until you've submitted your application. Others, like Syracuse, we will only interview you up until applications are due. So we start our interviews the summer before your senior year, and we stop them in December because our applications are due January 1. I get students all the time in February writing me to ask me for an interview. And I have to tell them that we interviewed from July to December, so they missed the boat. It's important to ask every school because we all do it differently. And if we do encourage you to interview, I would definitely say take advantage of it because it's another way for us to get to know you and a great way for you to know us. Now I'll hand it over to James.
Yeah. So what Camille mentioned on this page with essays and just how we're looking at trends and all this stuff with COVID-19, very similar. So there's really not much difference. We don't have an interview portion. So we don't do interviews, but with the COVID-19 essay or a portion that we would have for our personal part, you know, we really want students to really say what happened and kind of what Camille said. If it was something that was something that affected the family, affected, you know, the student that was applying or the applicant that was applying, to really tell us what happened. We did feel a lot of students that just filled that out because they felt that it was a necessity part of the application, which it wasn't. It was really meant for students that really did have certain issues with COVID-19. Our essay is really major specific, so it's a little bit more unique outside of the Department of General Studies. So, which is a little bit different than most universities. So we really try to stick it just right to the major, which is definitely, I think, somewhat unique with UIUC. But I think any kind of information you can add on within the essays, really do help. We look at goals and really what students are doing kind of in the future. So, a lot of this information that Camille said is very similar to what, at least with UIUC portion of at least our application. And also, Gary, before you move on, this is great because I made a mistake. I meant to say A to E with academic courses through the California system instead of A to G. I know A to G adds on with theater, dance, and guitar. Thanks so much for passing that information. So I meant to say A to E.
Great. I'm going to talk about the SAT and the ACT test, what happened starting last spring through this fall and even now this current spring. And one thing that we're hearing from this class of 21 is, hey, I wasn't able to take the test. And they want to tell us that in the essay. We completely understand. Don't use the COVID essay to let us know you weren't able to take the test if it was test optional and you didn't submit it. That's not necessary. Now, if you didn't take the ACT, SAT, you're probably thinking, well, what do colleges really look at? Because I know that's always been a major component. Well, guess what? We're going to look at your curriculum, the rigor of your curriculum, your grades, those essays, the things that we've just talked about. I will talk about the ACT and the SAT and what I call pivot policies. Many students last spring were prepared starting in March to take the April, May, June ACT, SAT, and they just simply couldn't because the tests were canceled. We know that. Guess what? The fall wasn't much different. I did have students that were traveling hundreds of miles to find a test and even showing up, and then the test center was canceled. Students, if you weren't able to take the ACT, SAT, but you've got the rigor, the curriculum, the grades, you write the essays, and we'll talk about the extracurriculars and the other things that we do look at. I'm certainly not saying don't take the SAT or ACT. If you can take the SAT or ACT safely, it's something to consider. There are some schools that the test is completely required. You cannot be admitted, you will not be admitted if you don't have an ACT, SAT. None of our schools are that way. How will you know? Ask the admission counselors. You can go to the regionaladmissions.com website. There's 100 different colleges with the admission counselors. Reach out to us. There are some colleges that are test-free. Even if you took the SAT or ACT, we won't look at that score. How will you know? Well, guess what? Ask the admission counselor. We're your best friend. I know you can look on the website and you think the website's always 100% true and accurate. It may not be quite right because the policies changed so much, so dramatically. I don't know of any schools today that are test flexible. It's a bit of a misnomer. Test flexible essentially meant that some colleges in the past would allow students to substitute in a different test, their PSAT, as opposed to sending in their SAT scores. But this is the new term that we're hearing quite frequently, and parents, students have heard about test optional. And I know that in the past, you probably heard the word interview optional. And you thought, well, if it's optional, I better do it because I've got to do it. Test optional simply means you have the option, if you took the test, to submit the score. How will you know whether it's a good score? Check with the admission counselors. Let's say there's 3 schools that you're considering, and you looked on the websites and you saw that a good SAT at school A was 1,300, at school B, 1,200, and school C, 1,100, and you scored 1,190. Should you submit that score? Is it a good score? Well, school C with 1,100, 1,190 is a very, very good score. At school B, 1,190, when the average is 1,200, You're not bad. But if school A, let's say, has 1,300 and you're 1,190, you're not really up to even average. So again, check with schools. If you can take the ACT or SAT safely and you do get a score and you want to report it, check with the admission counselors. That's what I implore you. The Cal States have changed their policy. You can check, this is straight from their website. The UCs changed their policy. And again, check with the colleges, look at the websites, but then reach out to the admission counselors. I'm going to mention UCLA because they got more applications than any other college in America this year. They got 30,000 more applications this year than last year. 30,000 more. They admitted 16,000 students last year and seated a class of about 4,000. Out of the 140,000 applications, it's still anticipated that UCLA will still enroll the same number of students. They didn't build new buildings. No college built new buildings during the pandemic. We didn't hire new faculty. Even though we saw surges, it was called the kind of why not take a shot mentality. Hey, I don't need an ACT and SAT. If you've got the curriculum, you've got the rigor, you've got the grades, you've got an essay, those are the things that we will look at. Look, the College Board's not even offering the SAT subjects test. The essay's been dropped. And students, I want you to walk away from this today realizing that you're not a test score. We don't admit numbers. We admit people. We're going to look at what you studied. How well did you do? Those essays are important. And if you do have a chance to interview, that can make a difference. So have that as some of the takeaways today. Let's talk about the activities, the extracurriculars. We know they were truncated last March. So James, Camille, talk a little bit about the activities, extracurriculars, if you would, please.
So I'm going to jump in for the before COVID-19. Which really, I think most universities for the before part, we wanted students active in and out of the classroom. So there wasn't much of a difference, I think, with what we would call a normal college or high school year. So, you know, we would want students to be participating in activities that might be close to their major, maybe community service, maybe sports and activities that show teamwork. So the COVID-19 absolutely hit. We saw a big, obviously drop in activities. Some students created their own. Some students could, we had some students that, made some really interesting activities on their own. Some of them continue to do their activities through Zooms, which was very difficult, but we understood the difference of being in the classroom and then being at home. We weren't hurting students for most of that spring, because what necessarily happened was, a pandemic. So the before with freshman and sophomore year, let's say if you guys are juniors, that freshman and definitely that sophomore first semester, we were definitely looking at that and we'll continue to look at. And we're going to see this coming year when students hopefully will get back into school. And Camille's going to touch on that. But the whole before part of it, we were really looking at what they did. And it did make a difference for, I think, some of our more competitive majors, because that's what we had to go on. But again, we understood the situation definitely from last spring, definitely when in March and then all the way through because people had to stop their activities. They had to stop athletics. So we were very understanding of that. Camille?
Yeah, I would agree with James on that. I think what we really were looking at was to see how students, how did you pivot? How were you able to react, kind of pick up the pieces from that major shift that we all had? Were you able to pick up a new sport, take an online class and start studying, I don't know, Russian or Chinese or something, or learning how to play the guitar, or learning how to surf? Did you have to stay home and help your little brother and sister with their schoolwork because mom and dad were working? What were the new things that you picked up? So we're more looking at that because we understand that all your regular activities got truncated. So we really want to kind of see how you were able to react And then based on, the possibilities, I mean, if you were a cross-country runner, then chances are you were probably able to remain working out. A lot of, runners were able to do that. But obviously, if you were playing a team sport, that wasn't the case. So we understand that part. We want to see how you reacted to it and how you were able to sort of pick up the pieces and try something new even. And so that's really when I was looking at the activities on this year's applications, and what I'll be doing also for your applications for you juniors is to see what how you sort of picked up in the summer and carried that through to the fall. And even now in the spring, I mean, not all activities are picking up again. So, what were you able to sort of continue with? It's really about how you were able to manage the major change that we all had to deal with.
Well, perfect. In the last few minutes that we have here, let's talk about demonstrated interest again, before and after, and then we'll talk about what happened at our campuses specifically. So James, before the pandemic, demonstrated interest. You turned off your mic.
Sorry about that. So, for us, demonstrated interest is not as important, what I would say, to some other schools. Definitely we had some issues, obviously, with visiting campus, because our campus was closed, besides our own students being on campus. Obviously receptions have been a bit of a challenge also, because they have been like this, through Zoom, but we definitely, I took notice of students that did visited me or did a high school visit through Zoom. I definitely made a lot of contacts because, generally you meet students, and I had to have almost, sometimes small groups that I could literally talk about University of Illinois, but I could also talk about college, and I could also talk about, any questions that they might have. And I always, sometimes with high school visits, put Illinois aside as well, because, the whole fact of the matter is that students are learning about where they want to be. And hopefully, sometimes they might be thinking about Illinois, but also they might not. So I think those high school visits were very important, and hopefully they continue to be that. Hopefully they'll be still in person. They'll be in person for this coming fall. College fairs, obviously, again, a little bit tricky. Emails and phone calls definitely skyrocketed this year, just because that was the biggest mode of communication. Our phone calls have done just a large hop. We do take phone calls, and I definitely help out within the Department of Admissions. So, I would say continue to still think about high school visits when we do come to see you, or if it's still through Zoom, because I think you can learn so much. And, there's a lot of value with comparison. Some of the things that you might like and some of the things you might not like. Not every school is going to be perfect, but I still feel like when you talk to an admissions counselor one-on-one, I remember you. And I think that's very important. Camille?
Yeah, so how has demonstrated interest sort of changed during the pandemic? So for schools that are a little bit smaller, and for many private schools, we do look at demonstrated interest. And the fact that students weren't able to visit campus, and we didn't have in-person fairs and school visits, meant that a lot of students felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to show my demonstrated interest. But like James said, I mean, we have been doing virtual school visits. It's really important that you attend those, because we have registration forms every time you attend a school visit, if you attend a virtual tour on our campuses, if you sign up for an interview. All of those things are in our system, and they all show up as demonstrated interest. I can go to any student's file and look to see how many different events they've attended. So just because you can't do it in person doesn't mean you can't show demonstrated interest. So very important to talk to schools, find out if they're doing campus tours. Some are starting up, some aren't, but you can probably do a virtual tour. What kind of different activities, what kind of virtual programs are they doing? Take advantage of those as much as you possibly can. And it's great, for all of us, we all work for out-of-state schools. So a lot of our California students maybe weren't having the opportunity to visit campus anyway. But because now all of us have put on such really strong virtual tours on our websites and all kinds of really good virtual programming, student panels, everything and anything, you guys now have a huge advantage that you didn't used to have, because you can really take advantage of all of those activities that normally, because we're farther away, you might not have been able to. So definitely you can reach out to your college counselors by email. I've been meeting with students and their parents through Zoom. So all of these things are super important if schools track demonstrated interest. And like James said, not every school does, but that's another question that you can ask to one of your college reps.
So every school has files on students. Even by being here today, if you gave us the permission, we're going to have you build a file. And let's hear about what happened during the pandemic in the future at Syracuse, Illinois, and New Mexico. So Camille.
Okay, so Syracuse was, we were open. We've been open all year. We started our fall semester early in early August, and we did not have a fall break so that we were able to finish up classes by Thanksgiving. So students would fly home for Thanksgiving and stay home. And they stayed home until late January, and we started our spring semester late. Again, we did not have a spring break. And so we'll pretty much start right on time. So that was to sort of avoid the coming and going of students. All of our students had to be tested and retested and retested. We have a testing center right on campus. We had all kinds of testing also with the facilities. We tested the wastewater in all of the dorms every single day, so that if there any positivity with COVID came out, we would be able to isolate students. All of our classrooms were set up for virtual learning in case a student got sick or, for whatever reason couldn't attend class. And then we set up tents all over campus to spread out as much as possible. Right now, we actually have a vaccine center on campus. So all of our staff, faculty, and students are getting vaccinated. All of our students will be required to be vaccinated to be on campus in the fall, and we will be opening, having a regular school year in the fall as well.
Great. Let's hear about Illinois.
So the University of Illinois, we created our own saliva-based test. It was called the SHIELD program, that was developed at the University of Illinois, pretty much through our bioengineering department. And the engineering, it was actually a lot of faculty members from working together to make the SHIELD program the saliva-based test. So our students were tested twice a week, which is one of the highest rates for a large state university like UIUC. You couldn't get into the buildings unless you had a negative result. So I mean, we did a really good job. Our students were on campus. We had a mix of hybrid. Students could choose either to do online hybrid or some in person. So I think, tracking our students, we had a very, very low COVID-19 rate throughout the year. We have passed on that COVID-19 test with the saliva test, we've passed it on to other universities. But it definitely, I think, brought a lot of faculty. And, I think just because we're not very far from a large area like the Chicagoland area. Plus we are a campus town. So there is a bubble being Champaign-Urbana. It's about 270,000 people. We're not Los Angeles. We're not San Diego or San Jose or San Francisco, where you have a lot of people. So we took that in context and protective. We didn't want anyone to come on our campus unless they were tested negative. We're very positive looking for next year. We're looking for hopefully to be having all our students on campus with being in person. So that's what we're hoping for. Our message is more going out hopefully in June. We have not made a decision on having our students vaccinated. I think that might be coming down the pipeline if we are a yes or no. Kind of what Camille said, that Syracuse is a yes. But I would definitely keep up with schools that are going that route because it's going to be in the news. And I think something, is important to know when you are thinking about attending a university. Gary?
Okay. The University of New Mexico last March was getting ready to start our spring break. And we thought, well, let's extend it from 1 week to 3 weeks because we'll have this thing licked. Well, that didn't quite happen. Students went home. They stayed home. We asked them to do that, and we refunded all their money from housing and dining. So it cost millions of dollars. We reopened in the fall. with 30% on campus in person. Again, this spring, 30% of the classes on campus in person. So it was hybrid. We anticipate this fall being at least 80% on campus in person, if not more. And the state of New Mexico is leading the nation in the number of adults fully vaccinated. So we're truly happy about that. Anybody in the state of New Mexico that wants a vaccine has the ability to get that. And we hope that they do as they return back to campus safely, whether it's faculty, administration, staff, students. So again, we appreciate it. Let's take some questions here as we've covered quite a bit of information. Time for Q&A. What do they say? So I'm going to pause the share. And James, what are the questions we're getting today?
Yeah, for sure. We got some great questions. So although many schools are not requiring SAT, ACT, or test score, does it help to take the test and submit it with the application, as it may be a pivotal factor in making an admissions decision? Do you recommend a child take this regardless, so they have to submit it? And Gary, you kind of mentioned this before. Either of you guys want to jump in? Because Gary, I think you definitely put a point of view on that one before.
Sure. If you're talking to a college and you ask them, what's your average ACT or SAT, and your score is that or much higher, then you definitely will want to submit it. At some schools, it could mean a bump in not only admission, but also maybe a little bit more scholarship. But if a school is test optional for admission, typically they're test optional also for scholarship.
Perfect. The next one, in the COVID-19 essay, can we talk about something we started as a result of the pandemic? I think, Camille, you had some great ideas, so I'm going to throw that to Camille.
Yeah, that would be a great opportunity for you to talk about something new that you've done during the pandemic. Maybe you started up an online company. Maybe you have done some tutoring or some community service or learned a new sport. So definitely that's where you do want to talk about something new and something creative, or something that you even just fell into but have, fallen in love with. So that's a great way to help us understand, what changed for you during the pandemic.
And you know what? This next one is right back at you, because you're the interview person on this. For interviews, where can we find out more about when colleges do interviews? Do we have to personally ask an admissions representative, or should we contact someone?
Yeah, so you can obviously ask an admissions rep if you see them, if you go to a school visit or you meet them at a fair. But you can also check websites. We're typically not going to contact you unless it's a school that only interviews after applications, and maybe they're contacting you because they want you to interview for a scholarship, say. But just an admissions interview, you can check the college websites, usually under the campus visits or the virtual events pages is where you're going to find information about interviews as well.
Perfect. Before we get to this last question where I'll hit up, Gary, what happened with the scholarships? Was there any pandemic scholarship movement? Anything you can talk about? I know University of Mexico does have great scholarships. Could you mention about any changes with the scholarships at UNM?
Yeah, we anticipated that the GPA might have had a small dip, so we actually had lowered the GPA requirement, and we anticipate that moving forward. A student with a 3.0 is paying the same as a resident of New Mexico. And so we're trying to, and I think all colleges realize that the spring 2020 grades, pass fail, maybe a student was doing well, and instead of getting an A, they got a P. Well, that didn't help their GPA, and we realize that. But students, if you continue to work hard, the curriculum, the rigor, you'll earn the scholarships at every university. Work with our admission counselors at any school. We'll tell you, hey, here's what it takes to get scholarship.
Big time. That's a great answer. And me and Camille will hit this last one. How much does the essay weigh in terms of the entire application? For us, the essay is extremely important. It really does show value. For some competitive majors, we actually admit students a lot of times based on their essay, because literally we could fill up some of our competitive majors with really high GPAs and so forth. So that essay becomes very important. I would spend some extra time thinking about the essay. And I know with Syracuse, your essay is a little bit different because we're major specific. But Camille, can you just give us some information about that?
Yeah, ours is a personal essay, but we definitely, that can make or break the application. Like James said, if there's students that are kind of right there, they're even with their grades, with their extracurriculars, that essay can really be what helps us determine whether we think you're going to be a really good fit for the university or not. So definitely take your time with the personal essay and the supplemental essays if a school has those as well.
Well, we got Russ back in the house. Hey, Russ, I think this is
Hello.
going to be it.
Yep,
It
I just
is, I
want to
think
thank you people for attending and StriveScan for hosting, organizing this, and for RACC. There are 3 sessions coming up, one at 5 o'clock, one at 6 o'clock, and one at 7 o'clock, where you can hear from 6 admission counselors during that next 45-minute session. So it'll be a little bit different. Russ?
Well, thank you very much. I couldn't have said it any better myself, but thank you to our panelists for presenting great information. And thank you all for attending this session. When you close this window, there'll be a link to a very quick 4-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback you can provide. And as Gary just mentioned, more sessions coming up, 6x6 sessions starting in about 14 minutes and 3 hours worth. So make sure you sign up for at least one if you haven't signed up already at the same place you signed up for this. And in about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording as well as all of the other session recordings at strivescan.com/RACC, RACC. Thanks once again to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.